Hi friends, thank you so much for connecting with me today. Appreciate you giving me a few minutes of your day. So we are in it might be week 6 or something. I'm losing track of our How to Pray series that's based on Pete Greig's book called How to Pray. And today our conversation is kind of about chapter 8, contemplation, but not really. It's really more about chapter 9, that Pete Greig talks about listening. Okay, so I'll put up the QR code for the video for this week. Okay, so let's kick this off by talking about communication. Any healthy communication in any healthy relationship is a two-way thing, isn't it? Healthy communication, good communication involves both expressing my desires and my thoughts, but also listening actively to the other person, right? I was part of and kind of more observing a conversation recently between a couple of people, and it was a very good-natured conversation. There was no problem about it. But as I reflected on the conversation after the fact, I thought, that was a very superficial conversation because there were two people who were talking at each other. They were both expressing their views, their opinions on a particular subject, right? But they were not listening to the other person. And in particular, person one said something that I thought, oh, that's interesting. Like, I think there's a question there and there's some follow-up to kind of dig a little bit deeper there, right? They said something interesting that if person two was actually listening to them, they would have asked the question, right? But they were not listening. And so person two just responded, right? And that's why I say that, it was two people who were talking at each other, but they were not really communicating. They were not listening to each other. So any healthy communication in any healthy relationship involves, yes, having the power to express my wishes, my views, my thoughts, my feelings, right? Yes, I express what I think, but I also actively listen to what the other person has to say, right? So why am I talking about this, when we're talking about prayer? Well, it occurs to me that most of what we talk about, and when we think of prayer, what we think about is us talking to God, right? Okay, God, here's what I think, here are my feelings, here's what I'm asking you to do. It's us talking to God, but how much of our prayer life is actually given to listening to God, right? And that, I think, kind of speaks to chapter 8, what I was saying earlier about contemplation. As we listen to God, it's more of an ongoing thing, not just a few minutes in like the morning or evening or whatever that we kind of give to, a focused prayer time. I think that actively listening is an ongoing thing through the day, what Thomas à Kempis called a familiar friendship with Jesus. Right? We have a familiar friendship with Jesus where we're just through the day, we're talking and we're listening, we're communicating with each other constantly through the day, right? Okay, so messed up my notes here. This reminds me, when we're talking about listening, it reminds me of what Jesus said in John 10. Jesus, this is the Good Shepherd passage, and in verse 14, he says, I am the Good Shepherd, I know my own sheep, and they know me, just as I know the Father, as my Father knows me, and I know the Father. He invites us into this beautiful relationship. Talk about a familiar friendship. Jesus invites us into this beautiful relationship of I know my sheep know me, just as I know the Father, and invited into that. And then in verse 16 he says, they will listen to my voice, all encompassed in this idea of a beautiful relationship. They will listen to my voice. And then Jesus emphasizes that again in verse 27. He says, my sheep listen to my voice. They listen to my voice. I know them and they follow me. Right? So what does it mean to listen to the voice of Jesus? This is a lovely thought, and we maybe talk sometimes about listening to the voice of Jesus, but when we pause to really think about that, to listen to the voice of Jesus, what does that mean? And how do we do it? It sounds like a great thing, right? Nobody would disagree, right? We'd all say, yeah, it's a good thing to listen to Jesus, right? But when we pause to think about it, what does that actually mean, and how do we kind of actually do it, right? So in our discussion on Sunday, this is going to be the question that I'm going to pose to you. How can we better learn to recognize and respond to Jesus's voice? Or I think maybe the question that I put in the notes is do you have any pro tips on how to listen to the voice of Jesus, to recognize and respond to his voice? Okay, so that will be our question. And let me just share a few of my thoughts. No, I'll just say up front that there's nothing revolutionary about what I thought. This is really kind of 101 type stuff. And my first thought in how to listen to the voice of Jesus is simply that we need to slow down, right? We need to slow down long enough to be able to hear his voice. I was talking with somebody just last weekend, and they have, a young family, young children, and they have a very, very busy life. And busyness, I think, is more affected. We tend to be more busy when our children are young, right? And just different stages of life, right? But talking to this mom with young children, and she was just describing how crazy busy their life is, right? and no judgment at all, because we have totally been there with our 4 children, but somehow we need to find a way to slow it all down, right? And maybe we might do the same number of things and the same things in a day, but somehow find a way to slow it down and to be able to do it with a slower internal pace, with a more of a calmness of spirit or something. I'm not sure how to really put that into words, but we can do the same amount of stuff, but do it with a calmness, a centeredness, maybe that's a good word, of spirit. I've often think about Richard J. Foster's book, Celebration of Discipline, and this book was written almost 50 years ago, 50 years ago, 48 years ago, 1978. And when I read this book, I bet it was close to 40 years ago, I bet, when I first got this book and read it. I underlined this paragraph in the book. Richard J. Foster, 48 years ago, said, in contemporary society, so whether it's 1978 or 2026, in contemporary society, our adversary, the enemy, the devil, majors in 3 things: noise, hurry, and crowds. If he can keep us engaged in muchness and manyness, he will rest satisfied. That's quite a statement. Psychiatrist Carl Jung once remarked, hurry is not of the devil, it is the devil, right? So yeah, just again, what he says, if the enemy of our soul, who, by the way, wants to steal, kill, and destroy, if the enemy of our soul can keep us engaged in muchness and manyness, he will rest satisfied, right? And that, yeah. So, when I think about busyness and I think about people pushing in with demands and desires, I think of Jesus. And if Jesus could slow it down and get away to spend time with his Father, then surely we can. In Matthew 14:23, this is after Jesus has fed thousands and thousands of people. I think this is the 5,000 feeding story. in Matthew 14:23, it says, after sending the crowd home, Jesus went up to the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone, right? So just Jesus modeled this of busyness of life, but finding time to get away, to slow it all down. Okay, so my first thought in how to recognize and listen to the voice of Jesus is to somehow in our busy life to slow it down, slow down the pace, and slow down our internal pace, maybe even more than anything. My second thought is, again, not revolutionary, but my second thought, first, is slow it down, and second, to look up. We talk a lot about how God is so full of love and goodness and joy and peace, and everything good and beautiful exists in the presence of God. And it's our job to go like this, to look up, to open our hearts, to have an open posture to him so that he can pour in his love and his goodness and let that infect our lives and change our lives, right? This is what we are called to do, to have an open posture to God and his love and his goodness. And I think that when we do that, when we have that kind of a posture, then again we grow into what Thomas à Kempis again calls a familiar friendship with Jesus, where this is our posture through the day, and we're just talking to Jesus. He's speaking to us. We're just kind of in an open relationship with him, right? And I think that kind of an open posture goes a long way to learning how to listen to God. Okay, so first of all, how do we listen? First of all, slow it all down, internal pace more than anything. Slow it down, look up, have an open posture, and then third, listen. Pete Greig in his book in chapter 9 talks about 5 things that we can learn to listen to God through. First of all, we listen to God through the Bible. We listen to God through dreams and visions. We listen to God through counsel and common sense. We listen to God through our personal reflection. And fifth, we listen to God through obedience. So this is like listening in action kind of thing, right? And so I'm not going to talk about I'm not going to unpack those 5 things, but let me just quickly comment on the first one, listening to God through the Bible. In my view, the way that God speaks to us most and best is through his word. Right? That kind of makes sense, right? It's God's word, and therefore he speaks to us through it. I know this is crazy stuff. But how can we posture ourselves to listen to God through his word? I've told you before that my Bible reading in recent years has changed. I used to, when I kind of came to my Bible reading for the day, would try to get through a certain passage. If I was like reading, the Bible, like a reading plan, Bible in 1 year kind of thing, I try to get through, the passage for the day. And now I can read the same reading plan, but if I feel like God, or when I feel like God is kind of shining a light on a particular passage, I might stop there and not read any further. What I'm doing is not trying to get through my reading, hear the language there, to get through my reading. What I'm doing is I'm listening for the voice of God, right? And when he shines the light, when he speaks to me through something, then I pause. And I might not read any further for the day. I pause and I say, what about this? What word or phrase stands out to me here? And then, why do I think it stands out to me? And then third, what do I feel like God is saying to me, through this word or phrase or through this scripture, right? First of all, what word or phrase stands out? Second, why do I think it stands out? And third, what is God saying to me through this, right? So I thought we would finish today, and we'll finish on Sunday by reading Matthew 11:28. And on Sunday, we're going to read this slowly and just allow God to speak to us through this and ponder it and then have a conversation. But Matthew 11, it says in the New Living Translation, it says, "Then Jesus said, Come to me, all you, excuse me, who are weary and carry heavy burdens. And maybe right there you go, oh, yeah, that's me. Come to me, you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Oh, it's beautiful. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart. I love that line. That might be the one that stands out to me the most. I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light. I'd also like to read this from the Message translation. And I think the Message translation actually gets to what Jesus is actually saying here. When you read in the Message translation, Jesus is speaking about the religious rituals. Come to me, who are weary and carry heavy religious burdens. That's what Jesus is talking about. The religious system that said you have to obey these rules. You have to do this and you can't do that. Just obey these rules. And Jesus is saying, just take a breath. Message translation, are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Beautiful statement. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep my company. Keep company with me, and you will learn to live freely and lightly. Man, I love that. And so on Sunday, we're actually going to just take a moment with no nothing, just to pause and to read that privately, personally, and then we'll have a conversation about what God is speaking to us. Okay, so I need to go, and I hope that you can be with us on Sunday, and if you can't, I hope that you have a fantastic week, and look forward to seeing you again next week. God bless you, friends.